Hello class, this is Mr. Mormon. Welcome to video 5 in our series on cells. Today we'll be talking about the cell membrane. So let's start with a definition. The cell membrane, also sometimes called the plasma membrane, is the very outer layer of the cell. It separates the inside of the cell from the outside. It protects the inner parts of the cell as well. The cell membrane is also involved in controlling the transport of materials, including waste products, into and out of the cell. It is also responsible for cell-to-cell communication by recognizing and responding to chemical signals. These communication functions and transport functions make the cell membrane very important in maintaining homeostasis. If you remember, that means keeping everything at its proper level, everything in balance, both inside the cell, and if it's a multicellular organism, inside the organism. The cell membrane plays a vital role in that communication and keeping everything at its proper level. It's called homeostasis. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the structure of the cell membrane. Here are diagrams of a typical plant cell and a typical animal cell. We see down here in the key that the cell membrane is number 7 in these diagrams. Remember that the outer layer of a plant cell is the cell wall, a thick, rigid, non-living layer made up of cellulose. And just inside that here, number 7, we see the cell membrane. The cell membrane is the very outer layer of this animal cell. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. Plant cells have a cell wall and a cell membrane. Animal cells are surrounded only by a cell membrane. Now, if we magnify the cell membrane so we can see the molecules that it's made of, this is what we see. In this diagram, the top part would be outside of the cell. This is the cell membrane itself, a cross section so that we're seeing inside of it. And this would be the inside of the cell. We can see that the membrane is made up mostly of these lipids. Those are the yellow molecules you see here. We call this the phospholipid bilayer. Bilayer because it's in 2 layers, as you see here. And these lipids contain phosphorus. These lipids arrange themselves into 2 layers, this bilayer, because they have a hydrophobic end and a hydrophilic end. Hydrophilic means water-loving. Hydrophobic means water-hating. Because both inside and outside of the cell there's a lot of water, the molecules automatically arrange themselves in this way, with the water-hating part of the molecule inside the membrane itself, the water-loving heads pointing to the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell where there's lots of water. In this diagram, we also see these other structures. These reddish-looking structures are proteins, which are embedded in the phospholipid bilayer, and you'll see they play an important role in the transport of materials in and out of this. On the outside surface of the cell membrane, we see that there's many, many different structures. We see these carbohydrate chains, and we see proteins. And we'll also see in a little bit that there are special proteins called receptor molecules that are important in the communication between cells. Now, all these proteins and carbohydrates on the surface help cells to identify one another. Your body will recognize cells that are supposed to be there, that are part of your body, because they have the proper signature or fingerprint, you can almost think of it, of carbohydrates and proteins on their surface. Foreign cells or invaders, like bacteria that get in, do not have the proper carbohydrates and proteins on their surface and are immediately recognized by your body, and your immune system will react to that and fight them off. Okay, next we're going to talk about how molecules move in and out of the cell through the cell membrane. The first thing we're going to talk about is diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of molecules from a higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Here we see a very high concentration outside of the cell. Over time, a lot of these molecules are going to be moving into the cell, going from high concentration outside to a lower concentration inside, and it ends up looking like this, where you've reached equilibrium and it's about the same on the inside and out. That's diffusion. In diffusion, molecules going from high to low concentration, they're going down the concentration gradient. You can think of it like sledding down a hill. This requires no energy. Diffusion can also move molecules out of the cell. Again, they will always just be going from where they're high concentration to an area where there's a lower concentration. Again, this does not require energy. The molecules will move all on their own. When we zoom in on the cell membrane, we can see that these very small molecules, things like water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, squeeze right in between the phospholipid bilayer and will diffuse right through the membrane itself. Again, that would be very small molecules. In this diagram, we can see some larger molecules might have a hard time diffusing through the phospholipid bilayer just because they're too big. And that's where those special proteins come into play. Here we see those much larger glucose molecules that would have trouble getting through the phospholipid bilayer. They find a path through this protein channel. It's like a tunnel made of protein that goes through the membrane. The molecules are still going to diffuse. They're going from high to low concentration. This does not require energy, but without this special channel, it would not happen. That's why this is called facilitated diffusion. To facilitate means to help or to make something happen more easily. Facilitated diffusion is again, just helping these larger molecules to get across the membrane. But it is still diffusion. This does not require energy. Now, sometimes the cell needs to move molecules against the concentration gradient from low to high concentration, maybe getting rid of waste from inside the cell or bringing certain nutrients into the cell. To move molecules against the concentration gradient requires active transport. When a cell is moving molecules against or up the concentration gradient from low to high, this is going to require energy. Now we're moving from a low concentration to a high concentration. Back to our sledding analogy, that would be like carrying your sled back up the hill. It's going to require energy, which, as we know, for all day-to-day cell processes, that's provided by ATP molecules. Here in this artist's drawing, we can see diffusion happening here. Molecules going from high concentration to low concentration. You'll notice that they call this passive transport. This would be diffusion. Again, going from high to low. It takes no energy. But here we see molecules being moved from a lower concentration to an area of higher concentration. That's going to require energy, and that's called active transport, and requires this special transport protein to do it. Here's another diagram that shows how this works. Again, the cell wants to move these molecules from low concentration to high concentration. The special protein, transport protein, will grab the molecule, and then it changes shape and forces the molecule against the concentration gradient. That shape change requires energy, or ATP, and will force the molecules from low concentration to high concentration, which could be moving things in or out of the cell depending what the cell needs done. Now, there's a special kind of diffusion called osmosis that you should be familiar with. Osmosis is the diffusion of water across a membrane. The cell membrane is said to be selectively permeable. Permeable means that it allows things to move through it, but the membrane is being selective. It allows certain things through and will stop others. That's what selectively permeable means. Now, back to osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water across a membrane. The water will diffuse, going from high concentration to low concentration. Here we see the shape of a normal red blood cell. Under certain circumstances, the water will be moving out of the cell due to osmosis. Water moving out of the cell will cause it to shrivel up like this. Under the opposite situation, the cell could fill up with water by osmosis. The cell could fill with so much water that it might even burst. So let's explore why this would happen. Cells placed in an isotonic solution. This is a solution where the solutes in the water are similar to what's dissolved inside the cells. So there's no high or low concentration. It's the same inside and out. The cell is going to stay the same then if the concentration inside and out is the same. But if you place a cell in a hypotonic solution, that means there's very little solute dissolved in it. That would be like distilled water. Distilled water would be a very high concentration of water, 100% water. If you have 100% water on the outside and a lower concentration on the inside, the movement is going to be into the cell. The same thing will happen with the plant cell. It's going to swell up because there's 100% high concentration outside. The water will be moving into the cell and it will swell. Now the opposite happens if you place a cell in a hypertonic solution. That would be like salt water, which has a lot of solute dissolved in the water. So it's not 100% water. If it's a 5% salt solution, it's only 95% water. A 10% salt solution is only 90% water. So when you place a cell in a hypertonic solution, like salt water, you're going to have a high concentration of water on the inside and a lower concentration on the outside. So by osmosis, the water will be moving out of the cell and it will shrivel up. If it's a plant cell, the cell wall will still hold its shape, but the cytoplasm will shrivel up inside. Okay, I think that's about enough for this video. We'll continue talking about the cell membrane in the next video. Again, as always, if you have any questions, please bring them up in class tomorrow.